The medical satchel came next, packed with essentials. Finally, she lit the great storm lantern that had guided her through countless rescue efforts. The barometer's needle could fall no further. As Eleanor unbolted her door to face the tempest's wrath, she knew this night would test the limits of her strength and resolve. But the sea was sending souls her way, and Eleanor Marsh had never once turned her back on those in need, no matter what flag they sailed under. Artifact, a broken cutlass, symbol of the pirate's vulnerability, the wind nearly tore the door from Eleanor's grip as she stepped onto her porch. Rain struck her face like needles, and the roar of the surf below drowned all thought. Her lantern light bent sideways in the gale, barely illuminating the treacherous path down to the shore. Each step required all her concentration as mud slid beneath her boots. The ship had vanished from sight, but Eleanor knew these waters too well. If any souls had survived, the currents would carry them to the small cove east of the lighthouse. It was there she headed, hunched against the storm's fury, one hand gripping the lantern, the other bracing against rocks for stability. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the beach ahead. Eleanor froze. A dark form lay sprawled at the water's edge, waves still washing over booted feet. Another flash revealed more shapes scattered across the shingle like driftwood, but driftwood never wore the shapes of men. She scrambled the remaining distance, caution abandoned. The first body lay face down, unmoving. Eleanor set her lantern in the sand and turned him carefully. A young man, no more than 20, with a beard too sparse to be called such. Blood from a head wound had mixed with seawater to paint macabre patterns across his face. 2 fingers pressed against his neck found a pulse, weak but present. Eleanor checked quickly for broken bones before dragging him beyond the tide's reach. As she did, something clattered from his belt to the stones. A cutlass, its blade snapped cleanly in half, the ornate handle still attached to his belt by a leather strap. The broken weapon gave Eleanor pause. No honest sailor carried such arms. The light caught intricate engravings on the handle, symbols she recognized from tales told in hushed tones. Pirate markings. No time to dwell on this revelation. More forms dotted the beach. Eleanor moved methodically from one to the next, finding 7 men alive but unconscious, 3 already claimed by the sea. She arranged the survivors in a row above the tide line, covering them with her oilskin to provide minimal shelter. A particularly violent wave deposited another body almost at her feet, a man older than the rest. His clothing finer despite its sodden state. A deep gash across his ribs still seeped blood, and a gold earring glinted in the lantern light. The man's breathing came in ragged gasps, but his eyes fluttered open as Eleanor examined him. "My men," he wheezed. "Trying to rise. Lie still," Eleanor commanded, pressing him down with surprising strength. "I found 10 so far. 7 live." The man's eyes focused sharply on her face. "There were 15 aboard when we struck." Eleanor nodded grimly. "I'll search again. First, this needs binding." She tore a strip from her petticoat and wrapped it tightly around his torso, stemming the bleeding. More searching yielded 3 more survivors and 2 bodies. All bore markings of piracy, tattoos, clothing, weapons. The final man she found was barely more than a boy, clutching a small wooden chest, even in unconsciousness. 15 accounted for, as the captain had said. But now came the impossible task, getting them to shelter. Eleanor studied the unconscious men. None would wake soon enough to walk. The storm showed no signs of abating. She returned to the captain, who had managed to prop himself against a rock despite his injury. "I can't carry them all," Eleanor said bluntly. The captain nodded. Pain etched in the lines of his weathered face. "The strongest first. Return for the others. And if the tide rises, then you've done what you could," he answered, his voice revealing the harsh calculus of survival at sea. Eleanor chose differently. Using driftwood and her own cloak, she fashioned a crude sledge. One by one, she dragged the men up the path to her cottage, muscles screaming in protest. The captain insisted on walking, though he leaned heavily on her shoulder. The journey took hours, the storm never relenting. By the time Eleanor had all 15 inside, the living arranged by her fire, the dead respectfully covered in her storage room, dawn was approaching. Though the storm's darkness obscured any hint of its arrival, she worked methodically, stripping wet clothes, binding wounds, forcing sips of broth between cold lips. Her cottage floor resembled a battlefield hospital. The captain watched her movements through fever-bright eyes. "Why help us?" he finally asked as she stitched his side. "You know what we are." Eleanor continued her neat suturing, never looking up from her work. "I know only that your soul's the sea delivered to my doorstep. What you are beyond that is between you and your maker." The broken cutlass lay on her table, placed there while emptying the men's pockets of seawater. It caught the firelight like a warning, reminding Eleanor that when these men awoke, she would be alone with 15 pirates, men for whom mercy was rarely a virtue celebrated, artifact, rare herbal remedies, Eleanor's secret healing ingredients. Midnight found Eleanor's cottage transformed into an impromptu infirmary. The storm continued its assault outside, but within these walls, a different battle raged, one fought with poultices and prayers against fever and injury. Eleanor moved between the men with the efficiency of a battlefield surgeon, her hands never idle. From a hidden cabinet beneath the kitchen floorboards, she retrieved her most precious supplies, herbs and remedies gathered over decades, some from shores as distant as the Orient, brought by sailors grateful for her care. These were reserved for the gravest cases, those hovering between worlds. The young boy who'd clutched the wooden chest burned with fever, his breathing shallow. Eleanor crushed rare saffron threads, worth their weight in gold, and mixed them with honey and a pinch of powdered pearl. This she spooned between his cracked lips, one precious drop at a time. "Not yet, lad," she murmured when he coughed weakly. "The sea hasn't finished with you." The captain watched her from his pallet by the fire, eyes following her movements with feverish intensity. His wound had been the worst, the jagged gash requiring 27 careful stitches. She'd given him tincture of poppy for the pain, but he fought its drowsing effects. "Blackwood," he said suddenly, his voice startling in the quiet room. "Captain James Blackwood." Eleanor nodded, without looking up from grinding willow bark for a pain remedy. "Eleanor Marsh. You've done this before. Treated men like us." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "I treat whoever the sea delivers. Your profession matters little when you're bleeding." A harsh laugh escaped him, quickly transformed into a grimace of pain. "Most would have left pirates to drown. Or summoned authorities." Eleanor moved to his side, checking the bandages around his torso. "The nearest authorities are a day's ride, and the village constable has a single pistol. Should I have sent for them while your men died?" Blackwood's eyes, unusual amber in color, held hers. "My first mate. Tall man, red beard. Did he survive?" "Up by the window. The head wound is severe, but his breathing is strong." Relief softened the captain's features momentarily before his mask of indifference returned. Another man moaned across the room, drawing Eleanor away. The sailor's leg had been badly broken, bone protruding through skin. She'd set it hours earlier, but infection remained a deadly threat. From her stores, Eleanor selected a moss found only in certain highland caves. Thomas had shown her its properties years ago. She packed it carefully around the wound, its antiseptic qualities far exceeding conventional remedies. "Devil's work," the captain commented, observing her unusual treatment. "God's creation." "Properly understood," Eleanor corrected mildly. "Though villagers might agree with your assessment, the storm reached new heights of fury, a particularly violent gust rattling the shutters." One of the younger pirates startled awake in terror, crying out in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. She moved to him immediately, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "You're safe," she soothed, though he likely didn't understand her words. The tone was universal, and gradually his trembling subsided. "Spanish," Blackwood supplied from across the room. "Juan was pressed into service from a merchant vessel. Still fears storms." Eleanor mixed chamomile and valerian, adding a drop of her precious lavender oil. The scent filled the room as she helped the young Spaniard drink the calming tea. One by one she tended to each man, applying different remedies for different ailments. For lung congestion from seawater, she burned certain resins, filling the cottage with aromatic smoke. For chills, she steeped ginger and cinnamon. Near dawn, the captain's fever rose dangerously. Eleanor bathed his face with cool cloths, concern etching her features. His wound showed no signs of infection, yet heat radiated from his skin. "The Black Fleet," he muttered, eyes unfocused. "Must warn them. The charts, the royal trap." Eleanor leaned closer.
"What fleet, Captain?"
But fever had claimed his coherence. His hand clutched at something around his neck, a medallion hidden beneath his shirt. Eleanor gently lifted it free to prevent it choking him in his thrashing. The design caught her by surprise, not a pirate emblem, but something far more unexpected. The storm began to abate as first light approached, though Eleanor took no notice. For 12 hours she had worked without rest, her only sustenance occasional sips of tea. The wounded men now slept more peacefully, their immediate dangers addressed. Only when the first rays of dawn penetrated the cracks in her shutters did Eleanor allow herself to sink into her chair, bone-weary, yet satisfied. 12 pirates lived who would otherwise have perished. Whether this was mercy or folly remained to be seen. On the horizon, invisible to her exhausted eyes, the first silhouettes of approaching ships appeared against the lightening sky. Artifact, Captain's Medallion, reveals his true identity and noble past mourning. Light filtered through the cracks in Eleanor's shutters, painting golden stripes across the room of sleeping men. She had dozed briefly in her chair, awakening with a stiff neck and the momentary disorientation of one who was pushed beyond exhaustion. The medallion still dangled from her fingers, where she had removed it from Captain Blackwood's neck hours before. In daylight, its details became clear, not the skull and crossbones she might have expected, but an intricate naval insignia. The royal crest occupied its center, surrounded by laurel leaves and Latin words, honor et fidelitas, honor and loyalty. Strange motto for a pirate. Eleanor rose quietly, checking each man's condition as she moved through her cottage. Most slept deeply, their bodies claiming the rest needed for healing. 3 had developed fevers during the night, but none life-threatening. The Spanish boy, Juan, watched her with wary eyes, though he no longer trembled. At the captain's side, she knelt to examine his wound. The stitches held firm, with no signs of the angry redness that heralded infection. His fever had broken some time before dawn, leaving his tanned skin cool and his breathing even. The amber eyes opened as she worked, startlingly alert. "Your men fare well," Eleanor informed him, keeping her voice low. 12 will certainly recover. The remaining 3 I cannot yet promise, but they fight bravely. Blackwood's gaze took in the cottage, filled with his wounded crew. "You've done more than most would." Eleanor held up the medallion, letting it swing gently between them. "Perhaps because you're more than you appear, Captain." His expression hardened, hand reaching to reclaim the medallion. When Eleanor relinquished it, he tucked it beneath his shirt with evident relief. "A trinket from another life," he said dismissively. "A life as a naval officer?" Eleanor pressed. "Those insignias are not given to common sailors." Blackwood pushed himself upright with a grimace, clearly unwilling to conduct this conversation from his back. "The past matters little compared to what I am now. And what exactly are you now? Your fever talk mentioned warnings, royal traps, charts." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You should not have heard such things, yet I did while saving your life." Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've 12 pirates in my home, Captain Blackwood. I believe I'm entitled to understand what danger I may have invited." For a long moment, the only sounds were the diminishing storm and the breathing of recovering men. Then the captain's first mate stirred, the tall, red-haired man whose head wound had worried Eleanor through the night. "Tell her, James," he said hoarsely. "She's earned the truth." Blackwood sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. Commander James Blackwood, formerly of His Majesty's Royal Navy, discharged without honor 3 years past. "Oh, so the official record states," Eleanor's eyebrow arched. "And the unofficial record. Dispatched on a secret mission to infiltrate the pirate fleets that have increasingly disrupted colonial trade. My disgrace was necessary cover. You're a spy." Eleanor couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. "I was," Blackwood corrected, "until I discovered the true corruption lay not with the pirates, but within the Admiralty itself. Certain officials have been orchestrating attacks on our own vessels, blaming pirates to justify military expansion and increased taxation." The red-haired mate interjected. "When James refused to participate further and threatened exposure, they arranged our accident at sea." Eleanor processed this revelation, its implications spreading like ripples. "And now?" "Now we sail under the black flag in truth, but with purpose beyond plunder," Blackwood explained. "We've gathered evidence, charts showing naval patrol routes deliberately leaving merchant ships exposed, correspondence implicating 3 lords of the Admiralty. The storm separated us from our fleet," the first mate added. 10 ships strong, commanded by Admiral Quinn, the only senior naval officer who believed James's claims. Eleanor's mind worked quickly. "The wooden chest the Spanish boy clutched contains the evidence," Blackwood confirmed. "We were bound for London, where sympathetic members of Parliament await our testimony." As if summoned by mention of his role, Juan spoke up in halting English. "Ships come." He pointed toward the shuttered window facing the sea. Eleanor unlatched the wooden panels and pushed them open. The storm had passed, leaving a sky of brilliant blue. On the horizon, silhouetted clearly against the morning light, 10 ships approached in formation. Their black flags snapped in the breeze, visible even at this distance. "The Black Fleet," Eleanor breathed. "Our allies," Blackwood corrected, a smile breaking across his weathered features. "And now, it seems, yours as well." Eleanor turned from the window, surveying her cottage full of men she had spent the night healing, men with a purpose far different from what she had assumed. The revelation left her both relieved and newly anxious. "The village will see them soon," she warned. "Pirates or not, that fleet will bring the militia, what little we have." "Then we have preparations to make," Blackwood said, attempting to stand. His wound protested, and Eleanor moved swiftly to support him. "First, you rest," she ordered firmly. "Your fleet won't arrive for hours yet. There's time enough to plan our next steps." Blackwood looked as though he might argue, but finally nodded. "As the doctor commands. Artifact, village bell. Signals an emergency meeting about the strangers." The village bell rang 3 times. Not the urgent, continuous peal that warned of fire or attack, but the measured toll that called the council to gather. Eleanor heard it clearly from her cottage, though her attention remained focused on her patients. By mid-morning, most of the pirates had regained consciousness. Those with minor injuries sat at her table, devouring the simple stew she had prepared. Others remained on pallets, but accepted broth and bread with grateful nods. The cottage hummed with quiet conversation in several languages. Captain Blackwood had managed to stand, though he leaned heavily on the mantelpiece. His gaze repeatedly drifted to the window and the approaching fleet, still hours from shore. "They've seen your ships," Eleanor said, nodding toward the village below. "The bell calls the council. Will they come here?" asked the red-haired first mate, whom she now knew as Henry Sullivan. "Eventually. Constable Jenkins, at the very least." Eleanor began gathering bloodied bandages, maintaining the practiced calm that had served her through countless crises. "He'll want to know what washed ashore in the storm." The cottage door flew open without warning. Eleanor turned to find Mary Cooper on her threshold, the young girl's face flushed from running up the cliff path. "Mrs. Marsh." "Father says to warn you." Her words died as she took in the room full of strangers. Fear widened her eyes as she noted the unmistakable pirate garb, the weapons propped against walls. "It's all right, Mary," Eleanor said gently, moving to block the girl's retreat. "These men were shipwrecked in the storm. I've been tending their wounds." Mary glanced nervously at the imposing figures. "Father says to tell you the village knows you've taken in survivors." Constable Jenkins and Reverend Holloway are coming to investigate. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And there are ships approaching, black flags. Thank you for the warning. Eleanor pressed a small packet into Mary's hand. Your mother's headache powder. Now go, quickly. The girl fled, casting one last curious glance over her shoulder. Eleanor closed the door behind her and turned to face the room. Your reputation precedes you, Sullivan observed dryly. Pirates or not, they fear for the village, Eleanor replied. I cannot blame them. Captain Blackwood straightened, wincing slightly. We must prepare. If your constable raises alarm about our presence, the reception of our fleet could turn violent. What do you suggest? You're in no condition to leave, and there's nowhere to hide 12 men. The truth, Blackwood said simply, or as much of it as necessary. Sullivan, the documents. The first mate retrieved the wooden chest from beside Juan's pallet. From it, he extracted a sealed packet bearing official stamps. Blackwood took it and handed it to Eleanor. My original commission and orders. It confirms my naval rank and service. Perhaps enough to give your village elders pause. Eleanor tucked the packet into her apron pocket as the sound of approaching voices drifted up from the path. Outside, hobnailed boots crunched on gravel, followed by an authoritative knock. Mrs. Marsh. Open in the name of the law. Eleanor exchanged glances with Blackwood before opening the door to reveal Constable Jenkins, his usually ruddy face now pale beneath his tricorn hat. Behind him stood Reverend Holloway and 3 members of the village council, including the harbour master. Constable, Eleanor greeted calmly. I expected you sooner. Jenkins peered past her into the cottage, his hand dropping instinctively to the ancient pistol at his belt. Reports say you've harboured survivors from last night's wreck. I have indeed. 15 men washed ashore near my cove. 12 survived. Pirates, the harbour master spat, pointing toward the horizon. Their fleet approaches even now. Eleanor stood firm in her doorway, blocking their entry. I took in injured men as I have always done. Their profession was hardly my concern while they lay dying. Reverend Holloway stepped forward. Eleanor, if these men are indeed pirates, you're harbouring criminals. The magistrate would have you jailed alongside them. The magistrate is welcome to ride out from Exwick to collect them, Eleanor replied evenly. Though I doubt he'll arrive before their fleet does. You endanger the entire village. Jenkins exclaimed. Eleanor withdrew Blackwood's sealed packet. Perhaps this will ease your minds. These men are not what they appear. The Reverend accepted the packet, breaking the seal with careful fingers. His eyes widened as he read the contents, passing the papers to Jenkins with a troubled expression. This man claims to be a naval commander on special assignment. He is, Eleanor confirmed, and those ships bring not destruction but justice, the harbour master scoffed. Convenient tale. I say we lock them in the root cellar until proper authorities arrive. The village bell began to toll again, faster now, urgent. All heads turned toward the harbour. A boy was running up the village street, pointing frantically toward the sea. The ships, he shouted. They've raised signal flags. They're coming into the bay. Jenkins turned back to Eleanor, indecision written across his features. I cannot risk the village on the word of a suspected pirate and, he hesitated, with respect, a woman of your particular reputation. Then perhaps came Blackwood's voice as he appeared behind Eleanor. Standing straight despite his injury, you should hear the explanation from me directly. Constable? The medallion gleamed at his throat, catching sunlight and the attention of the village delegation. The bell continued its frantic warning as, below, the village erupted into panicked activity. Artifact, sea chart, shows the captain's unusual route, and mission. Captain Blackwood gestured for Eleanor to bring the wooden chest. From it he withdrew a rolled parchment sealed with wax. Breaking the seal, he unfurled a detailed sea chart across Eleanor's table, weighing its corners with mugs to prevent it curling. The village delegation crowded around, momentarily forgetting their suspicions in their curiosity. The chart showed the coastline they all knew intimately, but marked with notations and symbols unfamiliar to civilian eyes. For 2 years, I have commanded what you call the Black Fleet, Blackwood began, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of an officer accustomed to being obeyed. But our true mission differs greatly from what appearances suggest. Constable Jenkins studied the chart skeptically. This shows patrol routes, naval patrol routes, Blackwood confirmed, deliberately designed to leave certain merchant vessels vulnerable to attack. The harbour master scoffed. Absurd! The Navy protects shipping. Some shipping, Sullivan interjected from his position near the fire. Those vessels owned by merchants who pay special considerations to certain admirals receive protection. The others become sacrificial lambs. Blackwood traced a finger along a red line on the chart. This is the route of the East India Company ship Venture, which was attacked last March. Notice how the naval patrols, his finger moved to blue lines, create a perfect gap here where the attack occurred. Coincidence, the harbour master insisted, though with less certainty, once perhaps. But 17 such coincidences in 14 months. Blackwood spread additional papers from the chest, logs, correspondence, ship manifests, all documented here. Ships left vulnerable, attacked, cargo seized, then the goods mysteriously reappearing in London markets, with certain Admiralty officials suddenly displaying newfound wealth. Reverend Holloway frowned deeply. You're alleging corruption at the highest levels of the Royal Navy. Not alleging, proving. Blackwood's amber eyes blazed with conviction. When I discovered this conspiracy, I brought my concerns to Admiral Quinn, the only senior officer I trusted implicitly. He confirmed my suspicions had merit, but warned that direct accusations would be futile. The guilty parties had protection in Parliament. Eleanor watched the village officials exchanging troubled glances. Even Jenkins seemed shaken by the evidence accumulating on her table. Admiral Quinn proposed an audacious plan, Blackwood continued. I would be publicly disgraced, apparently turning to piracy in my bitterness. In truth, I would command a special squadron with two purposes: intercept the deliberate attacks where possible and gather evidence of the conspiracy. The Black Fleet, Eleanor murmured. Blackwood nodded. Named for the flags we fly to maintain our cover, though our true colours remain loyal to the Crown, if not its corrupted servants. And the ships approaching our harbour now? Jenkins asked, visibly torn between duty and the compelling narrative unfolding before him. Admiral Quinn himself commands them. We've spent 2 years gathering evidence, saving ships when possible, documenting the conspiracy in meticulous detail. We were bound for London with our complete findings when the storm separated us. Blackwood's hand moved unconsciously to his wounded side. Had Mrs. Marsh not intervened, all our work might have been lost. Sullivan stepped forward, addressing the Reverend directly. We've never attacked an innocent vessel. The ships we've captured were already engaged in piracy themselves, usually hired by the corrupt admirals. The booty we've seized has been documented and will be returned to its rightful owners once justice is served. The village bell continued its frantic pealing outside. Through the window, Eleanor could see the approaching ships more clearly now, their black flags unmistakable. The harbour master followed her gaze, his expression hardening. A convenient tale, Captain, or whatever you are. But I've seen pirate work firsthand. My own brother's ship was taken 5 years ago, the crew slaughtered by the Red Brotherhood, Blackwood said quietly. Under the command of a Spaniard called Vargas. We hanged him and 6 of his officers last summer, after finding evidence linking them to Lord Hamilton, one of the conspirators we seek to expose. The harbour master's face drained of colour. How could you know? Because pursuing justice for such attacks has been our mission, Sullivan explained. Your brother's ship, the Merryweather, was deliberately left exposed by altered patrol routes. We have the original orders, with Hamilton's signature. A heavy silence fell across the room, broken only by the distant bell and the laboured breathing of the wounded pirates. Eleanor stepped into the gap. I cannot speak to naval conspiracies or Admiralty corruption, she said firmly. But I have spent the night tending these men. Whatever flag they sail under, they have shown honour and gratitude. If they intended harm to our village, why wait for their fleet? They could have silenced me and taken what they needed at any time. Reverend Holloway nodded slowly. There is logic in Mrs. Marsh's words, and risk in ignoring them, Jenkins added pragmatically. Those ships will make harbor within the hour. We lack the means to repel them regardless. Blackwood rolled the sea chart carefully. You need not fear them, but I would request your cooperation in receiving Admiral Quinn with the respect his true rank deserves, and your discretion regarding our actual mission. And in return, the harbour master demanded, justice for your brother, Blackwood replied simply, and the knowledge that you've helped end a corruption that has cost hundreds of innocent lives. Outside, the bell finally fell silent. In its place came a new sound, the distant boom of cannon fire, not in attack, but in the formal salute of a naval vessel entering a friendly harbour. Artifact, hand-carved wooden bird, a gift from a grateful pirate. The village delegation departed with Captain Blackwood's documents in hand, tasked with preparing the harbour for Admiral Quinn's arrival. Eleanor closed the door behind them with a sigh of relief, her shoulders sagging slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed. That went better than expected, Sullivan remarked, easing himself back onto his pallet. The head wound had reopened slightly during the tense exchange, a thin line of blood tracing down his temple. Eleanor immediately dampened a cloth and pressed it gently to the wound. You shouldn't have stood for so long. The stitches need time to set, Sullivan smiled ruefully. Couldn't let James face the Inquisition alone. That's not how we operate. Around the cottage, the other pirates watched with expressions ranging from amusement to respect. Eleanor had noticed their dynamic over the hours, fiercely loyal to their captain, but with none of the fear she would have expected from men serving under duress. You're a strange crew, she observed, securing a fresh bandage around Sullivan's head. Stranger than most, agreed a barrel-chested man Eleanor had learned was the ship's carpenter. His hands, massive and scarred from years of work, moved deftly as he whittled a piece of driftwood. Curls of pale wood gathered in his lap as a shape gradually emerged beneath his blade. Most of us were Navy men who followed Captain when he was discharged, explained another, a young sailor with a broken arm Eleanor had set during the night. Others joined along the way once they understood our true purpose. Juan, the Spanish boy, nodded enthusiastically from his corner. They saved my ship from real pirates. I joined to repay life debt. Captain Blackwood had returned to his pallet, the prolonged standing having taxed his healing wound. Each man here had the choice to leave at any port. None have. Eleanor moved methodically among them, checking bandages, administering medicines, offering water and broth to those still too weak to join the others at the table. The ritual of healing was familiar territory, unlike the complex political waters she now found herself navigating. How did you come to be the healer here? Blackwood asked, watching her work with evident curiosity. Eleanor's hands never paused in their tasks. My husband was the lighthouse keeper. When he was lost at sea, I took over his duties. The healing came later, out of necessity. Shipwrecks are common on this coastline, and the village. They seem to both need and distrust you. A slight smile curved Eleanor's lips. People fear what they don't understand. My remedies work, but they're not the standard treatments physicians prescribe. That makes me useful, but suspicious. A familiar position, Sullivan remarked dryly. The ship's carpenter looked up from his whittling, his weathered face serious. Folk always fear those who stand apart. Been true since the beginning of time. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. What's your name, Carpenter? Tobias Hayes, ma'am. 20 years with the Royal Navy before following the captain here. He turned the carving in his massive hands, revealing the delicate form of a seabird taking shape. My father taught me, said a man should create beauty when he can, since the world offers plenty of ugliness for free. It's lovely, Eleanor said, genuinely impressed by the detail emerging from the simple driftwood. For you when it's done, Tobias said with a nod. Small thanks for saving our hides. Throughout the day, as the fleet drew closer to harbour, Eleanor came to know the men she had saved. Each had a story, a reason for joining Blackwood's unusual mission. The ship's cook had lost a brother to an accidental naval cannon discharge after he'd questioned missing supplies. The navigator's merchant father had been ruined by suspicious attacks that somehow always missed his competitors. They helped where they could. Those with lesser injuries assisted in preparing meals, changing bandages for their more gravely wounded comrades, or simply keeping the fire stoked against the lingering chill of the storm. One taught Eleanor Spanish phrases, giggling at her pronunciation but beaming with pride when she improved. By afternoon, 3 of the men were well enough to accompany Blackwood down to the harbour, supporting him as he went to prepare for Admiral Quinn's arrival. The rest remained with Eleanor, the cottage now feeling less like an impromptu infirmary and more like a gathering of unlikely friends. "You didn't have to do this," Sullivan said quietly as Eleanor changed his bandage again. "Most would have sent for authorities immediately, regardless of our condition." "I've never turned away anyone in need," Eleanor replied simply. "Even knowing what we appeared to be?" Eleanor's hands paused briefly. "Perhaps especially then. It's easy to help the deserving, harder to help those the world has judged unworthy." Tobias looked up from his nearly completed carving. "That's a rare quality, Mrs. Marsh. Reminds me of something my captain used to say, that true courage isn't found in battle, but in mercy shown when there's nothing to gain by it." As evening approached, Tobias presented Eleanor with the finished wooden bird, an albatross in flight, its wings spread wide, every feather delicately rendered. She accepted it with genuine appreciation, placing it on her mantel beside Thomas's portrait. "He would have liked you all," she said softly, almost to herself. Then more loudly, "Come, let's prepare for your Admiral's arrival. I imagine there will be much to discuss when he comes ashore." Through the window, the first of the 10 ships was dropping anchor in the deep water of the harbour, its black flag rippling against the sunset sky. Artifact spyglass reveals the approaching pirate fleet. Eleanor stood on the cliff's edge. Thomas's old spyglass extended toward the horizon. Through its brass cylinder, the approaching ships came into sharp focus, 10 vessels of varying sizes, each flying the black flag that had struck terror into merchant crews across the Caribbean and beyond. Yet according to Blackwood, these were no ordinary pirates. The lead ship, a formidable frigate, now dominated the lens. Eleanor could make out figures moving across its deck, the glint of sunlight on brass fittings. Unlike typical pirate vessels, it displayed military precision in its approach, its gun ports still closed in a gesture of peace. "What do you see?" Sullivan had insisted on joining her despite his injuries, standing a respectful distance behind. "Discipline," Eleanor replied, collapsing the spyglass. "Your admiral runs a tight ship. Quinn was the finest officer in the fleet before this mission. That hasn't changed, even if our colors have." Eleanor tucked the spyglass into her pocket. "The village is in turmoil. Half believe Captain Blackwood's tale, the other half expect to be massacred by nightfall." Sullivan chuckled darkly. "If we meant them harm, we wouldn't announce our arrival with cannon salutes." The formal boom of naval guns had continued as each ship took its position, the traditional greeting of friendly vessels entering harbour. Eleanor had recognized the protocol from years of watching naval movements from her lighthouse. Pirates would have approached silently, under cover of darkness. "Your captain has gone to meet them?" Sullivan nodded. "With Roberts, Miller and Hayes, they'll brief Admiral Quinn on our situation." His expression grew troubled. "But they're not our only concern." Eleanor followed his gaze inland, where a plume of dust marked the approach of riders on the coastal road. The magistrate. Possibly, or worse, naval officials from Exwick. If word reached them about the fleet's approach, they might have dispatched forces. Forces that could include men loyal to your conspirators, Eleanor concluded, the implications settling heavily. "We should return to the cottage. Your men are still vulnerable." They descended the cliff path carefully, Sullivan still unsteady from his head wound. Below, the village had emptied, as residents either barricaded themselves in their homes or gathered at the harbour to witness the unprecedented arrival. Inside the cottage, The remaining pirates had positioned themselves strategically, two watching the village path, others keeping vigil toward the harbor. Their wounds hadn't prevented them from arranging Eleanor's furniture as makeshift barricades. "Expecting trouble?" she asked, observing their preparations, hoping not. "Planning for it anyway," replied the navigator, a thin man whose broken collarbone Eleanor had set. "Those riders Sullivan spotted. They're moving too fast for a routine patrol." Eleanor peered through her window toward the road. The dust cloud had resolved into 6 mounted men, moving at a gallop toward the village. Their uniforms were visible now, the dark blue of naval officers. "They're not from the local garrison," the navigator observed grimly. "Those epaulets mark senior officers." The implications hung unspoken in the air. If Blackwood's conspiracy reached as high as he claimed, these could be the very men they sought to expose, alerted somehow to the Black Fleet's presence and arrival with damning evidence. "We need to warn the captain," Sullivan said, reaching for his pistol. "You'll never reach the harbor before those riders," Eleanor pointed out. "And you can barely stand." The Spanish boy, Juan, stepped forward. "I go. I'm smallest, fastest. They not notice me." Before anyone could object, he slipped out the back door, disappearing into the garden that sloped down toward a hidden path to the shore. Eleanor silently wished him speed. "If those officers are indeed part of the conspiracy," Sullivan said quietly, "they won't hesitate to silence anyone with knowledge of their crimes." "That includes you now, Mrs. Marsh." Eleanor moved calmly to the cabinet containing her medical supplies. From behind the bottles and jars, she withdrew a small pistol, ancient but well-maintained. "Thomas believed in being prepared," she explained, seeing Sullivan's surprised expression. Pirates weren't the only danger a lighthouse keeper faced. The riders had reached the village now. Through the window, Eleanor saw them dismount outside the tavern, the apparent leader issuing orders that scattered his men through the streets. One pointed up toward her cottage. "They know we're here," the navigator said grimly. Sullivan moved to Eleanor's side. "Mrs. Marsh, you should leave. This isn't your fight." Eleanor checked the pistol's priming with practiced fingers. "They made it my fight when I chose to help you." She nodded toward the wounded men around her cottage. "I don't abandon patients in my care." The navigator distributed the few weapons they had among those able to use them, mostly knives and 2 pistols. They worked silently, efficiency born of naval training evident in every movement. Eleanor watched 2 of the uniformed men begin the ascent toward her cottage, their hands resting on sword hilts. Behind them, the others had begun questioning villagers, their manner aggressive even from this distance. "What will they do when they arrive?" she asked Sullivan. "If they're who we fear they are?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "They'll eliminate witnesses and seize Captain Blackwood's evidence. For men who've orchestrated the deaths of hundreds for profit, a few more murders would trouble their consciences little." Eleanor moved to the mantelpiece, taking down the wooden bird Tobias had carved. She stroked its smooth wings once before setting it safely in a drawer. "Then we'd best ensure they don't succeed," she said with calm determination, positioning herself behind her kitchen table, the pistol hidden in the folds of her apron. "I've defended this cottage against the sea's worst fury. I can certainly defend it against corrupted men." From the harbor came the sound of oars, long boats approaching shore. The race between Admiral Quinn's arrival and the mysterious officers had begun. Artifact, Black Flag. The pirate fleet's intimidating insignia, a sharp knock, rattled Eleanor's door. She exchanged glances with Sullivan, who positioned himself out of sight, pistol ready. The wounded pirates concealed themselves as best they could, gripping improvised weapons with white-knuckled determination. Eleanor smoothed her apron and opened the door, her expression composed despite the hammering of her heart. "Gentlemen," she greeted the 2 naval officers on her threshold. "What brings His Majesty's Navy to my humble cottage?" The taller officer, a commander by his insignia, removed his hat with practiced courtesy that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Mrs. Marsh, I'm Commander Wells of HMS Relentless. We're investigating reports of shipwreck survivors." "Indeed. How conscientious of the Navy to concern itself with common sailors." Eleanor didn't move from the doorway. "I treated several men washed ashore during the storm. Most have already departed for the harbour." The second officer peered past her, suspicious. "We'll need to inspect your premises, madam. I wasn't aware naval authority extended to searching private homes without warrant, Lieutenant." "Parish," he supplied curtly. "These aren't ordinary circumstances." "Pirates have been sighted offshore." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Pirates? How dreadful. Though I can't imagine what that has to do with my cottage." Commander Wells stepped forward, forcing Eleanor to give ground or appear overtly hostile. "Merely routine precautions, Mrs. Marsh. We wouldn't want you harbouring dangerous men unwittingly." As the officers entered, Eleanor caught sight of the harbour beyond them. Longboats from the fleet were approaching shore, their occupants resplendent in uniforms that blended naval precision with piratical flair. At their head, a distinguished figure stood in the bow of the lead boat, a man whose bearing marked him unmistakably as Admiral Quinn. Beside him stood Captain Blackwood, his tall figure recognizable even at this distance. Hope surged within her. If she could delay these officers just a little longer, I assure you— "Commander, I'm quite capable of judging a man's character," Eleanor said, following them as they began a methodical search of her cottage. "Tea? I was just about to prepare some." Wells ignored the offer, moving toward the back room where several pirates lay concealed behind makeshift barricades. Eleanor's heart sank as his hand moved to the door handle. A commotion from outside drew their attention. Through the window, Eleanor saw the remaining 4 naval officers rushing toward the harbour where the longboats had touched shore. Admiral Quinn's party was disembarking, creating a scene of controlled chaos as villagers gathered to witness the spectacle. Most striking was the flag carried by one of Quinn's men, not the expected Jolly Roger, but a unique design. The traditional black field remained, but the central emblem had been modified to incorporate elements of the Royal Navy's insignia alongside the skull and crossbones. It snapped in the breeze, a symbolic fusion of the pirates' reputation and their secret loyalty. Lieutenant Parrish cursed under his breath. "It's Quinn himself. We need to move now." The words confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. These men knew the Admiral and clearly feared his arrival. Wells abandoned his search, turning sharply toward the door. "Lieutenant, secure any documents here. I'll intercept Quinn before he can make contact with the village officials." Eleanor stepped deliberately into his path. "Commander, I believe the magistrate would take issue with officers removing items from a private citizen's home." Wells's facade of courtesy vanished. "Stand aside, woman. You have no concept of the matters at stake. I understand more than you might think, Commander, including why you're so eager to prevent Admiral Quinn from speaking with the authorities." The commander's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've been listening to treasonous lies. I've been treating wounded men who carry evidence of corruption that reaches to the highest levels of the Admiralty." Eleanor held his gaze unflinchingly. "Men who sailed under that black flag not as pirates, but as agents of justice." Wells's hand moved to his sword. "A pity you won't live to repeat such slander." "I wouldn't," came Sullivan's voice as he emerged from hiding, pistol trained on the commander. The other pirates revealed themselves as well, surrounding the officers. "Not unless you're eager to join the men you've betrayed." Through the window, Eleanor saw Admiral Quinn's party advancing up the path toward her cottage, Captain Blackwood pointing the way. Behind them came the village council, including Reverend Holloway and Constable Jenkins. Commander Wells assessed the situation with the calculation of a man accustomed to dangerous gambits. "This changes nothing. The word of pirates and an eccentric lighthouse widow against respected naval officers." "You'll all hang, perhaps," Eleanor replied calmly. "But first, I believe Admiral Quinn would like to discuss your unauthorized presence in his operation." The black flag-bearer had reached her garden gate now, the modified emblem clearly visible, a pirate's threat combined with a naval officer's authority. Behind it marched 24 men whose disciplined formation belied their fearsome appearance. Wells's face contorted with frustrated rage as the knock came at Eleanor's door, this time bearing the unmistakable authority of Admiral Quinn himself. Artifact Captain's Log. Documents the decision to honor Eleanor. Eleanor opened her door to reveal a tall, imposing figure in a uniform that blended naval authority with practical seafaring elements. Admiral Quinn had the weathered complexion of a man who commanded from the quarterdeck rather than behind a desk, his silver hair tied neatly at the nape of his neck. The intelligence in his grey eyes missed nothing as they swept the cottage interior, taking in the cornered officers, the armed pirates, and Eleanor herself. Commander Wells, Quinn said, his voice deceptively mild. This is an unexpected reunion. Wells straightened, defiance warring with military discipline. Admiral Quinn, or should I say, Traitor Quinn. Interesting accusation from a man who's betrayed his oath to the crown. Quinn entered without waiting for invitation, followed by Captain Blackwood and two officers bearing the distinctive black flag. Mrs. Marsh, I apologize for the intrusion. James speaks highly of your intervention on behalf of my men. Eleanor nodded acknowledgement. Your arrival is timely, Admiral. Indeed. Quinn turned his attention to Wells and Parrish. These gentlemen were about to remove evidence, I believe? On the authority of the Admiralty, Wells insisted, though his hand had dropped from his sword hilt. Ah, yes. Lord Hamilton's authority, specifically. Quinn produced a leather-bound logbook from inside his coat. This makes fascinating reading, Commander. Your own log, retrieved from HMS Relentless when we intercepted her this morning. Detailed records of your coordination with privateers targeting East India Company ships, vessels that coincidentally had refused Lord Hamilton's request for special considerations. Wells's face drained of colour. You boarded a Royal Navy vessel? That's an act of war. A curious perspective on naval operations, Quinn remarked dryly. Captain Reynolds was quite cooperative once we explained our true mission. Your first officer, too, seemed relieved to unburden himself of knowledge regarding your activities. Outside, the village council and several curious villagers had gathered, straining to glimpse the confrontation through Eleanor's windows. Constable Jenkins pushed his way inside, his hand on his ancient pistol. What's happening here? He demanded, looking bewildered at the crowded cottage filled with naval officers, both uniformed and disguised as pirates. Quinn turned to him with formal courtesy. Constable, I am Admiral Frederick Quinn of His Majesty's Royal Navy, commanding a special operation with the Crown's direct authorization. He handed Jenkins a sealed document bearing the royal insignia. These men, he indicated Wells and Parrish, are to be detained pending investigation for treason, corruption, and conspiracy to commit piracy. Jenkins examined the document with wide eyes before nodding uncertainly. The magistrate's jail is at your disposal, Admiral. Excellent. Captain Blackwood, please escort our colleagues to their new accommodations. Quinn's tone made the order unmistakable. As Blackwood led the arrested officers away, Sullivan quietly relieving them of their weapons, Quinn turned his attention fully to Eleanor. Mrs. Marsh, I understand we owe you a tremendous debt. Captain Blackwood reports that without your intervention, both he and our mission's evidence would have been lost. Eleanor shook her head modestly. I merely did what anyone would do for souls in peril. According to James, you did considerably more. You risked your reputation and safety for men most would have immediately reported as pirates. Quinn glanced at the logbook in his hands. I've commanded men for 30 years, Mrs. Marsh. I recognize courage when I see it. The Admiral moved to Eleanor's table and opened the logbook, revealing pages of neat script. When this operation began 2 years ago, I started documenting every significant development. The evidence we've gathered, the ships we've saved, the conspirators we've identified. He turned to a fresh page. Today's entry will detail how a lighthouse widow's courage preserved our mission at its most critical juncture. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Admiral, Furthermore, Quinn continued, once our evidence is presented in London and this conspiracy dismantled, there will be rewards and commendations. He looked around the simple cottage with its worn furniture and patched curtains. I would be honored to recommend you for recognition. I need no recognition for doing what's right, Eleanor said firmly. Quinn's weathered face creased in a smile. A commendable sentiment, though one I respectfully disagree with. Virtue should be rewarded, particularly when it comes at personal cost. The cottage had gradually emptied as the wounded pirates were helped aboard longboats to receive treatment from the fleet's surgeons. Outside, a remarkable scene unfolded as villagers cautiously approached the pirates, their fear giving way to curiosity as the true nature of the fleet became known. My men wish to express their gratitude, Quinn informed Eleanor. With your permission, I would like to invite you aboard my flagship tomorrow. My officers have requested the honor of formally thanking the woman who saved their brothers in arms. Eleanor glanced toward the harbor, where the 10 ships rode at anchor, their black flags now seeming less menacing and more proud against the evening sky. I would be pleased to accept. Admiral, she replied, surprising herself with the decision. In 40 years, she had never left the shore, preferring the solidity of land to the unpredictability of the sea that had claimed Thomas. Quinn made a final notation in his log before closing it with satisfaction. Excellent. Captain Blackwood will escort you at noon. He bowed formally. Until tomorrow, Mrs. Marsh, you have my deepest gratitude. As the Admiral departed, Eleanor realized that the village onlookers were regarding her with expressions she had never seen directed her way before. Not suspicion or grudging respect, but something that looked remarkably like admiration. Artifact town charter used in argument over Eleanor's actions. Morning brought a knock at Eleanor's door, not the polite tap of Captain Blackwood, who was to escort her to the flagship, but the commanding pound of official business. Eleanor opened the door to find Mayor Wilkins, the village council arrayed behind him like a tribunal. Reverend Holloway stood slightly apart, his expression troubled. Mrs. Marsh, the mayor began without preamble, the council demands an explanation. Eleanor regarded them calmly. Please come in, gentlemen, though I'm uncertain what requires explanation after yesterday's events. They filed into her cottage, which seemed smaller with 6 men occupying her limited space. The mayor remained standing, while the others arranged themselves awkwardly around her table. Beneath his arm, he carried a leather-bound volume Eleanor recognized as the town charter, the founding document that governed Port Haven's laws and customs. You have harbored criminals, the mayor stated, laying the charter on her table with the gravity of a judge placing a Bible before witness testimony. Pirates, Mrs. Marsh. I believe Admiral Quinn clarified their true nature, Eleanor replied. They are naval officers on a sanctioned mission, the harbormaster snorted. So they claim. Yet they fly the black flag and bear pirate markings, a necessary disguise for their work, Eleanor said. Work that, I might add, includes bringing justice for your brother's murder. She directed this last comment to the harbormaster, whose mouth snapped shut in response. Mayor Wilkins tapped the town charter. Regardless of their current status, you made your decision to shelter them when you believed they were pirates. Section 12 clearly states that any citizen aiding or abetting criminals shall face banishment from the township. Eleanor's eyebrow arched. How interesting that you've never invoked Section 12 when the magistrate's son returned from his drunken escapades, or when Councilman Pierce's nephew was caught stealing from the chandlery. The mayor flushed. Those were minor infractions, not piracy. And as it happens, Eleanor continued, I was not aiding criminals at all, but Crown agents. An act Section 23 specifically commends as the duty of all loyal subjects. Reverend Holloway cleared his throat. She has the right of it, Wilkins. I've reviewed the charter myself this morning. Mrs. Marsh's actions, while appearing questionable at first, ultimately served the Crown's interests. The mayor's face darkened. This isn't about legalities, Reverend. It's about the danger she placed us all in. Had those men been actual pirates, the entire village could have suffered. Had I turned away drowning men based on suspicion, Eleanor countered, I would have violated a more fundamental law than any written in your charter. The law of human decency. Fine sentiments, the harbour-master muttered, until your decency invites cutthroats to slit our throats while we sleep. Eleanor fixed him with a steady gaze. I've lived on this coast for 40 years, sir. In that time, I've seen more honest souls drown than I care to remember, and more dishonest ones saved by chance or circumstance. The sea makes no moral judgments when it claims lives, nor do I when I preserve them. The cottage fell silent. Through the window, Eleanor could see the fleet at anchor, longboats moving between ships and shore in a disciplined pattern, unlike any pirate operation. In the village below, sailors mingled with locals, sharing drinks at the tavern and tales of their adventures. The initial fear had given way to curiosity, then to cautious acceptance as the true nature of the pirate fleet became known. Mayor Wilkins followed her gaze, his expression souring further. And now they've invited you aboard their flagship. A great honor, I'm sure. One I've accepted, Eleanor confirmed. Captain Blackwood arrives at noon to escort me. The council forbids it, the mayor declared. No village resident shall board those vessels until their true nature is confirmed by Crown authorities. Reverend Holloway stood abruptly. Enough, Wilkins. Admiral Quinn presented his credentials yesterday. Commander Wells's log confirms their mission. What truly troubles you is that Mrs. Marsh, a woman you've marginalized for decades, has been recognized for courage while you hid in your home. Barring the door, the mayor spluttered. But the Reverend continued, warming to his theme. For 20 years we've benefited from her healing while whispering behind her back. We've taken her lighthouse service for granted while excluding her from village life. Perhaps it's not Mrs. Marsh who should face the council's judgment, but the council itself. Eleanor had never heard the gentle Reverend speak so forcefully. His words hung in the air, unanswerable in their truth. The mayor closed the charter with a sharp snap. The council will deliberate further. Until then, Mrs. Marsh, be aware that your actions have consequences. I've always been aware of that, Mayor, Eleanor replied evenly. It's why I choose my actions with such care. After they departed, only Reverend Holloway lingered at her threshold. I apologize for their behavior, Eleanor. Fear makes small men smaller still. Thank you for your support, Reverend. He smiled slightly. Truth requires no courage to speak, merely opportunity. He glanced toward the harbor. Enjoy your visit to the flagship. I suspect Admiral Quinn has more in mind than a simple expression of gratitude. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. Reverend, why did you defend me today? You've never taken my side before. Holloway paused, considering. Perhaps because yesterday I saw what true honor looks like. It made me realize how little of it I've displayed these many years. He continued down the path, shoulders straighter than Eleanor had ever seen them. In the harbor, the flagship's pennant snapped in the breeze, calling her toward an unexpected future. Artifact, silver chest, contains a formal proposition. Captain Blackwood arrived precisely at noon, his wound clearly paining him, despite his efforts to stand straight. The naval uniform he now wore transformed him. Gone was the pirate captain, replaced by an officer whose bearing revealed his true station. Mrs. Marsh. He greeted her with a formal bow. Admiral Quinn awaits. Eleanor had dressed in her finest gown, a modest blue affair she wore for Christmas service, and pinned her silver hair more carefully than usual. At the last moment, she tucked Tobias's carved bird into her pocket, a talisman of sorts. The village watched in silence as Blackwood escorted her down to the harbor. Only Mary Cooper waved, earning a sharp reprimand from her mother. The longboat waited at the pier, 8 oarsmen standing at attention as Eleanor was helped aboard. The men insisted on the honor of rowing you personally, Blackwood explained as they pushed off. Each volunteered from among those you treated. Eleanor recognized several faces, Juan beaming from his oar position, Sullivan managing the tiller despite his bandaged head. They rowed with military precision, the motion smooth despite the choppy harbor waters. The flagship loomed before them, its size more imposing up close. The name emblazoned on its stern surprised her, HMS Redemption, a strange moniker for a naval vessel, yet perfect for its current mission. The crew had assembled along the rails. And as the longboat came alongside, they raised a cheer that startled Eleanor with its enthusiasm. A boatswain's chair was lowered, the traditional method for bringing civilians aboard who couldn't manage the steep ladders. "Is this necessary?" she asked, embarrassed by the attention. "Admiral's orders," Blackwood replied with the ghost of a smile. "He insists on honoring you properly." Reluctantly, Eleanor allowed herself to be secured in the chair and hoisted aboard. The moment her feet touched the deck, the assembled crew removed their hats in a gesture of respect typically reserved for officers of the highest rank. Admiral Quinn awaited her on the quarterdeck, resplendent in full-dress uniform. Behind him stood his officers in formation, their uniforms displaying the unusual fusion of naval insignia and piratical elements that characterized the Black Fleet. "Mrs. Eleanor Marsh," Quinn announced formally, "HMS Redemption welcomes you with gratitude and honor." Eleanor curtsied awkwardly, unaccustomed to such ceremony. "Thank you, Admiral. Though such formality seems excessive for a simple act of mercy." "Simple acts of mercy are what separate civilization from barbarism," Quinn replied. "Please, join me in my cabin. We have matters to discuss." The Admiral's quarters were spacious and elegantly appointed, with windows across the stern providing a magnificent view of the harbor and village beyond. A large table dominated the space, charts and documents arranged with military precision. Most striking was a small silver chest positioned prominently on the table. Ornately decorated with naval motifs, it gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the windows. "Please be seated," Quinn invited, pulling out a chair for her. Captain Blackwood and Sullivan joined them, along with an officer Eleanor hadn't met, a younger man with intelligent eyes who carried a portfolio of documents. "Mrs. Marsh," Quinn began, "our mission approaches its conclusion. Within the week, we sail for London with evidence that will expose corruption at the highest levels of the Admiralty. Lord Hamilton and his conspirators will face justice for their crimes." "I'm pleased to hear it," Eleanor said. "Many innocent lives will be vindicated." "Indeed." Quinn nodded to the young officer who opened his portfolio. "However, our victory reveals a secondary concern. The coastal defenses Hamilton deliberately weakened must be restored. Proper lighthouse operation is essential to this security." Eleanor tensed slightly. "My lighthouse has never failed in its duty, Admiral." "On the contrary," Quinn smiled, "it has performed beyond all reasonable expectation. A single widow maintaining both lighthouse and medical services for an entire coastline. Remarkable," he gestured to the silver chest. "This brings me to the purpose of today's invitation." Quinn opened the chest, revealing a sealed document bearing the Admiralty's official stamp, nestled on velvet alongside a substantial purse of coins. "The Admiralty wishes to establish a proper coastal station at Port Haven," he explained. "A facility combining lighthouse operation, medical services for shipwreck survivors, and a small naval detachment to secure the coastline." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "You're replacing me?" "On the contrary," Blackwood interjected. "We're proposing to formalize and expand your role." The young officer slid the document across the table. "This commission offers you the position of Lighthouse Commander and Chief Medical Officer for the Port Haven Coastal Station, with full authority, staff and resources." Eleanor stared at the document in disbelief. "You're offering an official position to me?" "With a proper salary, staff of 6, and expansion of your facilities," Quinn confirmed. "The Crown recognizes exceptional service, regardless of its source, but Eleanor hesitated. "A woman?" Quinn finished for her. "Indeed, one whose courage and competence have proven more valuable than a regiment of soldiers." Blackwood leaned forward. "The position comes with a naval rank equivalent, Mrs. Marsh. You would be accorded the respect and authority of a senior officer." Eleanor's mind raced, the implications overwhelming. After decades of operating on the margins of village society, to be suddenly offered legitimacy, authority, resources. "The village council might object," she said, thinking of the morning's confrontation. "The coastal station operates under Admiralty jurisdiction, not village authority," Quinn explained. though I expect their objections will fade when they understand the economic benefits of a permanent naval presence." Sullivan smiled. "Not to mention the advantages of having a properly supplied medical facility in their community." Eleanor touched the wooden bird in her pocket, drawing strength from its simple artistry. "This is unexpected, yet well-deserved," Quinn assured her. "Do you accept?" Eleanor looked out the stern windows toward her cottage on the cliff, the lighthouse that had been her responsibility in prison for 40 years. From this distance, it seemed smaller, more fragile than she had ever perceived it. "Admiral," she said finally, "I'm honored by your offer, but before I accept, I would propose a modification to your plans." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Port Haven needs more than a coastal station," Eleanor said, 40 years of unspoken dreams suddenly finding voice. "It needs a proper harbor, one that offers genuine haven to ships in distress. One with facilities to care not just for bodies, but for souls." The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but interest flickered in his eyes. "Continue." Eleanor hadn't realized until this moment how long she had carried these visions, these hopes for what her village could become. Now, with unexpected opportunity before her, the words flowed with surprising conviction. Artifact, architectural plans, blueprint for Eleanor's vision. 3 days after Eleanor's meeting aboard HMS Redemption, Port Haven barely resembled the sleepy coastal village it had been for generations. The harbor teemed with activity as longboats ferried men and materials between ships and shore. Sailors in naval uniforms worked alongside villagers who had cautiously, then enthusiastically, joined the transformation. Eleanor stood on the bluff beside her lighthouse, unrolled architectural plans held down against the breeze by stones at each corner. Beside her, Admiral Quinn and Captain Blackwood studied the drawings with professional interest. "Ambitious," Quinn remarked, tracing the sweeping design with a weathered finger, "but entirely feasible with the resources at our disposal." The plans showed Port Haven reimagined, not merely a coastal station, but a true haven for ships and souls alike. A reinforced harbor wall would extend from the northern headland, creating a sheltered basin where vessels could ride out the fiercest storms. The existing pier would be expanded into a proper wharf capable of accommodating larger ships. Most striking was the proposed hospital facility adjacent to an enlarged lighthouse complex, a place where both bodies and spirits could heal. "Your architect has a remarkable understanding of coastal engineering," Blackwood observed. Examining the technical details, Eleanor smiled. "Mr. Hayes has hidden talents. 20 years in naval shipyards before becoming a ship's carpenter." Tobias Hayes had revealed his background only yesterday, when Eleanor shared her vision for Port Haven's transformation. By evening, he had produced these detailed plans, working through the night with the precision of a man reunited with his true calling. Below, Hayes directed a team of sailors and village men in laying the foundation for the harbor wall. His massive hands gestured with surprising delicacy as he explained complex engineering concepts in terms the villagers could understand. "Your proposal caught me off guard," Admiral Quinn admitted. "I expected gratitude, perhaps negotiation for better terms, not a complete reimagining of our plans. I've watched ships founder on these shores for 40 years, Eleanor replied. "Treating survivors after disaster strikes is necessary work, but preventing the disasters entirely?" She gestured toward the plans. "That would be a true legacy," Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "The Admiralty will approve the expanded scope, especially when I explain how a proper haven here closes one of the coastline's most vulnerable stretches." The village council had initially balked at the scale of disruption, but their objections crumbled when faced with Admiral Quinn's authority and the economic opportunity the project represented. Even Mayor Wilkins had grudgingly conceded that Port Haven stood to become a significant maritime waypoint rather than a forgotten fishing village. Most surprising was the villagers' response to Eleanor herself. The suspicion that had shadowed her for decades had begun to dissolve, as they witnessed her standing alongside naval officers, her ideas treated with respect, her knowledge valued. Children who had once been forbidden to approach her now watched in fascination as she directed medical orderlies in establishing a temporary infirmary. "Mrs. Marsh," Mary Cooper called, hurrying up the path. The girl had appointed herself Eleanor's unofficial assistant, much to her parents' initial dismay. "Reverend Holloway asks if you'll inspect the chapel. Renovations. The village chapel was being expanded to serve as both place of worship and community gathering space," another element of Eleanor's comprehensive vision. The Reverend had embraced the plan with unexpected enthusiasm, seeing opportunity to serve both his congregation and the sailors, who would soon make Port Haven a regular port of call. "Tell him I'll come directly," Eleanor replied, rolling up the architectural plans. As Mary raced back down the path, Eleanor noticed Juan working alongside village boys, his Spanish accent already adopting local inflections. The young sailor had requested permission to stay in Port Haven when the fleet departed, expressing desire to learn proper English and healing arts under Eleanor's tutelage. "You're building more than structures here," Blackwood observed, following her gaze. "You're building bridges between worlds that rarely connect peacefully." Eleanor hadn't considered her work in such terms, but recognized the truth in his words. Pirates and villagers, sailors and fishermen, outsiders and locals, all working toward a common purpose. "Admiral," she said suddenly, "there's something I haven't asked. What becomes of your men when this mission concludes? They've lived as pirates for years. Can they simply return to naval service?" Quinn's expression grew somber. "Many can't. Despite their loyal service, the disguise they adopted makes them unsuitable for traditional posts. Some will receive commendations, then discreet dismissal. That seems unjust after their sacrifices. Indeed. I've worried about their futures since we began this mission." Eleanor studied the bustling activity below, an idea forming. Port Haven will need experienced men to staff the coastal station, men who understand both naval discipline and the harsher realities of life at sea. Quinn's eyebrows rose. "You're suggesting my pirates become your staff?" "Why not? They've proven their character under the most challenging circumstances. Who better to rescue ships in distress than men who once made their living pursuing them?" A slow smile spread across the Admiral's weathered features. "Mrs. Marsh, you continue to surprise me. It's an elegant solution, if unusual. No more unusual than a widow running a lighthouse or pirates serving the crown," Eleanor pointed out. "Sometimes the unconventional path is the wisest one." As they descended toward the village, Eleanor paused to watch Tobias directing the placement of foundation stones for the harbour wall. The wooden bird he had carved sat on a rock beside his tools, a simple symbol of the connection that had formed between unlikely allies. "Commander Marsh," Quinn said, using her new title with deliberate formality, "I believe Port Haven will soon live up to its name in ways none could have imagined." Eleanor nodded, accepting both the title and the vision it represented. It's time this shore offered true sanctuary, not just from storms, but from judgment as well. Artifact, naval documents. Warning of approaching government ships. The messenger arrived at dawn on the 7th day, his mount lathered from hard riding. Eleanor was already awake, reviewing supply inventories in her cottage, when the urgent knocking disrupted the quiet morning. "Commander Marsh," the young naval courier said, clearly still adjusting to addressing a woman by military title. "Urgent dispatch from Exwick." The sealed document bore Admiral Quinn's personal mark. Eleanor broke it open, scanning the contents with growing concern. The message was brief but alarming. 2 ships of the line departed Portsmouth 3 days past. Destination, Port Haven. Mission, investigate reports of pirate fleet harbored with local cooperation. Commander Wells's associates have reached Admiralty before us. Exercise extreme caution. Accelerate preparations. Quinn. Eleanor tucked the dispatch into her pocket and hurried down to the harbour, where the transformation continued at remarkable pace. The harbour wall had taken shape, a crescent of stone, extending like a protective arm around the bay. Tobias Hayes directed stonemasons with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. "Mrs. Marsh," he called, spotting her approach. "We've completed the foundation course." "Another week and—" "We don't have another week," Eleanor interrupted, pulling him aside and sharing Quinn's warning in hushed tones. Hayes's expression darkened. "Naval vessels." "How many guns?" "The dispatch doesn't specify, but ships of the line suggest at least 74 each." "Against our 10, Hayes calculated grimly. "And only the Redemption has comparable firepower." Eleanor surveyed the harbor where the Black Fleet rode at anchor, their crews divided between ships and shore. "We need Admiral Quinn." Quinn and Blackwood had departed 2 days earlier for a brief mission to intercept another of Hamilton's agents, expecting to return tomorrow. Their absence couldn't have come at a worse moment. Within the hour, Eleanor had assembled the remaining officers in what had once been the village tavern, but now served as an impromptu headquarters. Sullivan, his head wound nearly healed, studied the naval documents spread across the table. If they left Portsmouth 3 days ago and have favorable winds, he reasoned, they could arrive by tomorrow evening, before the Admiral returns, one of the officers noted grimly, and before the harbour defences are complete, added Hayes. Eleanor traced the coastline on the map before them. "What options do we have?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sullivan voiced what all were thinking. "Without the Admiral, our authority is questionable. When those ships arrive, they'll see a pirate fleet and a village apparently collaborating with it. Could we move the fleet?" Eleanor suggested. "Conceal it until Admiral Quinn returns with reinforcements." Hayes shook his head. "No hidden anchorages within sailing distance that could accommodate 10 ships. Then we stand our ground," Eleanor decided. "Continue construction, but prioritize defensive positions." Sullivan looked troubled. "Mrs. Marsh, these are King's ships coming. If we appear hostile, they come because Welles's conspirators have poisoned the Admiralty with lies," Eleanor said firmly. "We need only delay them until Admiral Quinn returns with evidence of the true conspiracy." As the meeting dispersed, Eleanor was surprised to find Mayor Wilkins waiting outside, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "I overheard," he admitted without preamble. "Naval vessels coming to investigate." Eleanor nodded, seeing no point in denial. "By tomorrow evening, likely. The village council should be informed. And cause panic? We have preparations to make, Mayor." Wilkins straightened his waistcoat with nervous fingers. "Mrs. Marsh, Commander, this village has existed peacefully for 3 centuries. Now suddenly we face naval bombardment?" "No one is speaking of bombardment," Eleanor assured him, though the possibility had occurred to her as well. "This is a misunderstanding that will be resolved when Admiral Quinn returns, and if he doesn't return in time," Wilkins pressed, "if those ships demand surrender of the pirates you've harbored." The question hung between them, impossible to dismiss, yet difficult to answer. Finally, Eleanor spoke with quiet certainty. "These men are not pirates, but naval officers on a sanctioned mission. I will not betray them based on false accusations, even if it means risking the village." "The village is in no danger from Admiral Quinn's fleet," Eleanor stated firmly. "As for the approaching ships, we will clarify the situation peacefully." Wilkins shook his head. "You've changed, Eleanor. A month ago you were simply the witch of the lighthouse. Now you speak with the authority of an admiral. I speak with the conviction of someone who has seen truth revealed. Mayor, these men risked everything to expose corruption that has cost hundreds of innocent lives. I won't abandon them now because it's convenient. And if your conviction costs Port Haven everything." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Then I will bear that responsibility. But I don't believe it will come to that." As Wilkins departed, Eleanor returned to the harbour, where construction continued with renewed urgency. The village had divided in its response to the news, which had spread despite her hopes for discretion. Some families loaded possessions into carts, preparing to flee inland. Others worked with greater determination alongside the sailors, as though the harbour wall might shield them from more than just storms. By sunset, lookouts had been posted on the headlands, the ship's crews recalled to their vessels. and the half-completed harbour fortified as best possible with the materials at hand. Eleanor stood on the bluff beside her lighthouse, Thomas's spyglass in hand, searching the darkening horizon for any sign of sails. "They won't arrive before morning," Sullivan said, joining her vigil. "And the Admiral could return by then." Eleanor lowered the spyglass. "And if he doesn't?" Sullivan's expression was grim but resolved. "Then we face what comes, Commander, as we always have." Below them, lanterns illuminated the harbour where work continued through the night. The village and fleet united in common purpose and common danger. Artifact, Eleanor's hidden letters, reveal her own past connection to Piracy Dawn, broke with no sign of either Admiral Quinn's return or the approaching naval vessels. Eleanor had slept little, dividing her night between organizing defenses and searching through the dusty sea chest she'd kept locked beneath her bed for decades. The chest contained the last remnants of Thomas, his navigational tools, the logbooks from his merchant sailing days, and most preciously, his letters. She'd avoided reading them for years, the pain of his loss too acute. But now, with conflict approaching, she sought wisdom from the past. The brittle pages crackled as she unfolded a particular letter, one Thomas had instructed her to open only in direst need. His familiar handwriting blurred through her tears as she read. Revelations he had kept from her during their marriage, truths that suddenly connected to the present crisis, in ways she could never have imagined. As morning light strengthened, Eleanor descended to the harbour, the letter tucked securely in her pocket. Sullivan met her at the newly constructed wharf, his expression grim. "Lookouts report sails on the horizon," he informed her. "2 ships of the line approaching from the south." "No sign of the Admiral," Eleanor nodded, her resolve strengthened by her night's discovery. "Gather all officers aboard the Redemption. There's something you must know before they arrive." The Redemption's great cabin had been converted to a war council, maps and charts covering the table where officers gathered anxiously. Eleanor placed Thomas's letter before them. "My husband was not merely a lighthouse keeper," she began without preamble. Before settling in Port Haven, Thomas Marsh served as navigational officer aboard HMS Valiant under Captain Frederick Quinn. The officers exchanged startled glances at the familiar name. "Admiral Quinn knew your husband," Sullivan asked. "More than knew him. They were conspirators in uncovering the same corruption we face today." Eleanor smoothed the letter with trembling fingers. 30 years ago, they discovered evidence that certain admirals were deliberately sacrificing merchant ships to French privateers in exchange for shares of the plunder. "The same conspiracy," Hayes breathed. "After all this time, not the same men but the same corrupt system," Eleanor clarified. "When Thomas and Quinn attempted to expose Lord Pembroke, Hamilton's predecessor, they were branded traitors. Quinn escaped with his ship and crew. Thomas was captured, tortured for information on Quinn's whereabouts, then released as a broken man when he revealed nothing." Sullivan's eyes widened with understanding. "So Quinn established himself here to protect Thomas and continue their work from the shadows," Eleanor confirmed. "My lighthouse became their secret communication point. For 10 years, Thomas and I helped Quinn intercept merchant ships targeted by the conspiracy, warning them of ambushes, redirecting them to safer routes. You were part of this all along," Hayes said softly. "Until Thomas's death," Eleanor nodded. "A storm," they said, "but this letter suggests otherwise. Thomas believed he'd been discovered again. After his death, Quinn disappeared. I assumed captured or killed. When Admiral Quinn arrived with your fleet, I didn't recognize him at first. 30 years changes a man. But he recognized you," Sullivan realized. "That's why he offered you the command so readily. He knew what Thomas and I had sacrificed," Eleanor agreed. "And he knew I would understand the importance of completing their mission." The cabin fell silent as the officers absorbed this revelation. Outside, preparations for the approaching confrontation continued. Gun ports opened, weapons distributed, the village secured as best possible. "This changes our approach," Sullivan said finally. If you and the Admiral share this history, your authority in his absence is unquestionable. You know the mission's true purpose better than any of us." Eleanor shook her head. "I'm still a civilian in the eyes of naval law. When those ships arrive, they'll see a woman commanding pirates. The letter changes nothing officially. It changes everything in spirit," Hayes countered. "You're not merely our temporary commander. You're the continuation of a 30-year battle for justice." A young officer burst into the cabin. "Ships approaching the harbor entrance, ma'am. They've raised signal flags demanding our surrender." Eleanor stood, decision made. "Prepare my boat. I'll speak with them directly." "Commander, that's too dangerous," Sullivan protested. "I've faced their kind before," Eleanor replied, a steel in her voice none had heard previously. "Thomas died because he couldn't prove the corruption he discovered. We now have that proof in Admiral Quinn's documents. Documents they'll likely destroy if they take the fleet." Hayes pointed out, "Then we must ensure they don't take it." Eleanor smoothed her dress, not the naval uniform Quinn had offered, but the simple attire of a lighthouse keeper's widow. "Signal the fleet to stand ready, but make no aggressive moves. I'll buy time for the Admiral's return. And if they don't respect your authority?" Sullivan asked quietly. Eleanor withdrew Thomas's medallion from around her neck, identical to the one Blackwood wore, the secret symbol of Quinn's loyalists. "Then I'll remind them of an older authority, the oath every naval officer takes to serve justice above all." Her expression softened momentarily. Thomas believed one person standing for truth could change the course of history. Today, we'll test that belief. As Eleanor departed for her boat, Hayes called after her. "What shall we do if you're detained?" Eleanor paused at the doorway. "If I raise my right hand, it means treachery is intended. You must protect the fleet and the evidence at all costs." Her gaze swept the assembled officers. "Even if it means leaving me behind." The gravity of her words settled over the cabin as Eleanor stepped into the bright morning light, walking steadily toward the boat that would carry her to confront the very corruption that had claimed her husband's life 3 decades before. Artifact, Monument Stone. Commemorates the unlikely alliance 5. Years had passed since that fateful morning when Eleanor Marsh rowed alone to meet 2 ships of the line at the harbor entrance. The Monument Stone, unveiled today in the central square of what was now called Haven Port, commemorated what happened next, though the official account differed somewhat from the truth Eleanor alone knew. The stone, an obelisk of gleaming granite, bore the names of all who had played a role in the miracle of Haven: Admiral Quinn, Captain Blackwood, the crews of the Black Fleet, and at the top, Eleanor Marsh, commander of the Royal Haven Station. Carved into its face was a relief showing a woman standing between opposing fleets, her upraised hands bringing peace. Eleanor traced her name with weathered fingers, amused by the romanticized depiction. The actual confrontation had been far more precarious, her small boat dwarfed by the massive naval vessels. Cannon trained on her position as she presented Thomas's letter and Quinn's evidence to skeptical officers. For tense hours, she had stood on the flagship's deck, arguing her case while the fleet and village waited for either reconciliation or destruction. What had saved them all was not Eleanor's eloquence, but Admiral Quinn's timely return with Lord Hamilton himself in custody, intercepted, attempting to flee to France with stolen treasury funds. The Admiral's arrival had transformed accusations into vindication, suspicion into triumph. "Still uncomfortable with your celebrity?" Captain Blackwood asked, joining her at the monument. Now a Commodore, he commanded the naval station that had grown from Eleanor's vision. "Heroism suits me poorly," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "I merely did what was necessary, as did we all," he agreed, "though few would have faced down 74 cannon armed only with the truth." Eleanor glanced around the transformed harbor. Where once a struggling village had huddled against the sea's fury, a thriving port now welcomed ships from across the empire. The hospital she had envisioned treated hundreds each year, its reputation for healing drawing patients from distant shores. The expanded lighthouse, still under her command, guided vessels safely through waters once notorious for shipwrecks. Most satisfying was the community that had formed, former pirates serving honorably alongside villagers who had once feared them, sailors finding respite in a port designed for both body and soul's restoration. Mary Cooper, now a young woman, trained as Eleanor's apprentice in both lighthouse operation and healing arts. Admiral Quinn sends his regrets, Blackwood informed her. Parliamentary duties prevented his attendance. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Gwyn's exposure of the Admiralty conspiracy had elevated him to a position of significant influence. His reforms had transformed naval operations, emphasizing justice and integrity over blind obedience. "The children are waiting, Commander," Blackwood reminded her gently. "Your story is the highlight of the commemoration," Eleanor sighed. The annual retelling had become tradition, though she kept the darkest moments from young ears. "Very well. Though I still maintain others should receive greater recognition, perhaps," Blackwood conceded, "but symbols matter. The woman who stood between warring fleets and demanded justice. That story inspires far beyond our shores." They moved toward the gathering crowd where children sat in expectant rows. Among them were orphans from the harbor home Eleanor had established, former street children now receiving education and purpose. One, no longer a frightened Spanish boy but a respected translator, waved from where he supervised the youngest ones. As Eleanor settled into the ceremonial chair, she caught sight of Tobias Hayes directing final adjustments to the monument's position. The wooden bird he'd carved during his recovery sat on her mantel still, a reminder of how unexpected connections could form in the crucible of crisis. "Tell us about the pirates, Commander Marsh," a small boy called out, eyes wide with anticipation. Eleanor smiled. "They weren't pirates at all, child. They were men of honor disguised by necessity, seeking justice when conventional paths failed them." "Were you scared when you faced the big ships?" asked a girl in the front row. "Of course," Eleanor answered honestly. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite it." As she recounted the sanitized version of events, Eleanor's thoughts drifted to Thomas. What would he think of the legacy they had built together, though separated by death? His vision of exposing corruption, her dream of creating true haven, both realized in ways neither could have imagined. The setting sun cast the monument's shadow across the square, stretching toward the lighthouse on the bluff. Eleanor had insisted it remain lit despite newer navigation technologies, a symbolic flame maintaining tradition while embracing progress. After the commemoration concluded, Eleanor walked alone to the cliff edge, gazing out at the peaceful harbor where ships from across the world now anchored safely. The Black Fleet had dispersed years ago, its mission complete, though many crew members had remained to serve the new coastal station. From her pocket, Eleanor withdrew the medallion Thomas had carried, the secret symbol of Quinn's loyalists that had ultimately vindicated their 30-year quest for justice. She had considered adding it to the monument's artifacts, but decided some symbols belonged to personal rather than public history. "We did it, Thomas," she whispered to the horizon where sea met sky. "Your sacrifice meant something after all." Below, Havenport glowed with lantern light as evening settled. The harbor that had once sheltered 15 desperate pirates now provided sanctuary for hundreds. The village that had once shunned an eccentric widow now celebrated her leadership. And the woman who had once stood alone against injustice now commanded a community united by shared purpose. Eleanor returned to her cottage, expanded now, but still maintaining the simple charm that had sheltered so many destinies. As she lit her lamp against the gathering darkness, she reflected that the greatest monuments were not carved in stone, but built in changed lives and second chances. Beyond her window, the monument stone caught the lighthouse beam, its message of courage, illuminated for ships still finding their way home.